You're watching Face to Face, and I'm your host, Tim Vince. Today we will be talking about faith and innovation, and we have a very special guest to go through this wonderful subject. Welcome, Martin Charlesworth.
Nice to be with you, Tim.
And Martin, we have known each other since 1987.
Yes, indeed.
So everything that's gone wrong in my life since then, I don't attribute to you, but it's a great blessing every time we're in touch. And you have been faithful in ministry ever since I first met you in Shrewsbury. Can you tell us a little bit of background and then we'll get into the topic?
Yes, well, I mean, I became a Christian at 15, Tim, and I went into teaching and then into business and started in ministry in 1988 in Shrewsbury, joining the staff of a local church, Barnabas Community Church. And everything has gone from there. So I had a little bit of background in different skills and professions. I lived in Pakistan as a child. I worked in South Africa as a young man. So there were lots of experiences in the background which helped me. And I've been in ministry since 1988.
And you studied history at Oxford, if I remember
I did,
right?
yes. I was a history teacher originally.
Amazing, very interesting. So one day we can talk about the history of this period of our lifetimes. But
yes.
Yeah, whenever I talk to you, there's something new and innovative. So it's a good title, and you've sort of used that generically to describe your ministry journey.
Yes.
So where should we start, Martin?
Well, if we start back in 1988, then I was called to serve on the leadership team of my local church, and I responded giving up my previous careers and work because I felt a call of God that goes back many years before to be a leader and also to preach and teach the Bible. I was very inspired by Bible teachers like David Pawson and others, and my pastor in Oxford, Michael Green, well-known evangelical of that generation. And I wanted to follow their example and replicate some of their skills perhaps in a smaller way.
Wow. So David is, I would say, in the present tense, he's a great friend of this channel.
Yes.
And he's in glory now, resurrected. Yes. And so I praise the Lord for our dear brother David. And we're talking about Michael Green from St. Aldits.
Indeed, yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's a great influence. And yeah, so you've been doing Bible teaching over all these years, but you've felt a burden to do more and to move beyond the parish of Shrewsbury.
Yes, so I mean, I was a pastor for many years in Shrewsbury. I led the church for 20 years from 1994 to 2014. But I think I had a longer term ambition, Tim, which was to produce systematic Bible teaching that's accessible to the church in poorer nations, where education levels are lower, and where access to training is very limited, and where some people are learning by oral learning, some people are in remote communities with lack of access to the internet. And I was inspired by David Pawson's capability of doing systematic Bible teaching and really inspiring people by going through a whole book or a whole passage very clearly, giving context and everything. And I thought, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to do that for people in fast-growing churches in many countries who've got very, very few resources and very little time available to help them. So I've developed a project in order to address that need. And one of the triggers, actually, Tim, was a visit I made to Kenya some years ago. And I was preaching in a church, and the pastor introduced me to one of the young boys in the church, and he left me talking to this boy who came from a very, very poor background. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, what's he talking to him about?
Yeah.
So we started with the Premier League. It's always a good thing. Football works all over the world. And then I saw his phone. So I said, tell me about your phone. And so he picked up his phone. I picked up my phone. I had a smart Western phone. He had a battered Android. And I could see his capabilities on the phone. And I suddenly began to realize if we're going to reach poorer people with effective teaching resources, we need to use the phone, the smartphone. It's everybody's means of communication. It's everybody's means of accessing the internet, however poor they are. Yeah. So that was a trigger for me to develop
That's amazing, because David Pawson, of course, was the the cassette tapes, the C90s and C60s or whatever.
Yes, he started with cassette tapes.
And then he went on to DVDs.
Yes.
And then I nudged him and said, David, you've got to go, you've got to actually go into these digital dials. And that was like a revolution for him, but he stuck with it right through to the end.
He did, yeah.
But that really is the key, because they all have these mobile phones.
So wherever you go in the world, in poorer countries, the most noticeable thing is the rise of smartphone usage, and people buy cheap phones off the market or even on the black market, and they're accessing apps of all sorts, even with very great poverty. Yeah. And so this is the way to reach people. So I developed a project called Word Online. Wordonline.org is the website. Over the last 8 years or so, I've been working on it, which is a bit of a miracle project, really. I had the idea, Tim, of going through the Gospels and recording videos that cover every single passage in the Gospels, putting it in a harmony, which involves incorporating all the 4 Gospels together and creating a single chronology and looking at all the parallel passages. And so I spent 4 years preparing the material. And it turned out to be 184 episodes of half an hour. Yes. And I wrote down these notes, and I checked all my references. And
Can I throw you a googly? So you've got the 4,000 and the 5,000 who are fed.
Yes.
How did you harmonise?
They're two different events.
Yep.
The feeding of the 5,000 is notable because it happens in a Galilee context near Bethsaida. The feeding of the 4,000 happens in the Decapolis area, where there's much more Gentile influence, slightly further to the east. And so there's possibly a significance that the miracle done for the Jewish people in Galilee is replicated in a more open social context, in an area where Jesus didn't visit very frequently. So although the human need was the same in both cases, the social context was different, and there might be a prophetic balance between the two.
Okay, one more, and then we'll go on to more innovations. If you have faith, you can move a mountain from here to there. If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can throw this mountain into the sea. Is that it's fair to say there could be different recollections because there were from 3 different synoptic writers?
Yes. So basically, the principle of harmonization is to accept the authority of all the text and understand that recollections come differently, and so harmony will identify: is this the same event? And if it's the same event, you harmonize or add together the different ingredients in the story that are in different places. But very often, of course, you'll get a saying which is similar and is repeated on a different occasion, but slightly differently. And that's what any teacher does.
Exactly.
And Jesus did exactly that.
That is engaging. And the other thing is, if I'm right, it's a kind of random access memory. So they can look into an index if they want to, as we would ourselves, opening the Bible to look at a specific passage. Yes. They can look at that digitally and hear the preaching.
So basically, Tim, what happens is on the website wordonline.org or on the web-based app, which you can download onto iOS or Android, you can go into the material, and the Gospels is in 14 different series, and that's all on a chronological basis. You can find a particular passage, and then you can listen to the video, you can listen to the audio, you can download the audio onto a podcasting platform. You've got a transcription which drops down, you've got subtitles if you need them, you've got study guide, you've got tagging. So you can go anywhere in the Gospels, any passage, and it'll be there. The only place where I don't expand a passage fully, if there are parallel passages, I will take the biggest account and I'll refer to the other passages, but I won't go down them separately. But every single passage and text of the Gospels is there in the life of Jesus. And I've done the same thing for the book of Acts, by the way.
Wow.
So there are, wonderful. If I recollect correctly, 47 episodes, which goes through the book of Acts. Obviously, chronologically, that's much simpler, but it's telling the story of the early church in a wonderful way. And I'm now working, as we speak, on recording 39 episodes of the book of Romans, and shortly 12 episodes of the book of Galatians. And so you can imagine what's in my mind is I'm hoping to keep adding to these until we cover as much of the New Testament as I have capability.
It is really a fulfillment of go ye into all the world, make disciples of all peoples. And there's a kind of prophetic fulfillment here
Yes.
in reaching the unreached.
So my particular goal with this is to reach leaders, pastors, preachers, disciplers, and new disciples who are very keen on the scriptures, who understand English reasonably well to like a secondary school education and use it probably as a secondary language.
Yeah.
And if they can do that, then, and they don't have the educational opportunities that I've had and that you've had and we have in the West, they can access that material to get a pretty good understanding of how what that scripture means, what the context of it is, what the likely applications are. So I've presented the material in Word Online in a very kind of international framework, using English in a very straightforward way, not speaking too fast, not using local examples in Western or British culture that would mean nothing to other people, trying to think of examples.
Keep the vocabulary, digestible.
As far as possible, though that's tricky at times. Also thinking of honour and shame culture and cultures of fear in terms of supernatural powers, as well as our more predominant sort of guilt and forgiveness culture in the West, and trying to think of those themes in gospel terms. So that's really what I've done.
And also, you have a plan, because you're not someone that stands still, a plan to translate into the sort of predominant languages of whichever continent you're aiming at.
Yes. So the limitation of the website and the resources all in English.
Yeah.
And I recognise that although English is a primary international language, obviously very accessible to many people, it's a real limitation of the resource to be only in English. The goal would be to translate this material into a number of key international languages so we can get a much greater accessibility. The key to that is finding sponsors and funding, the technologies in place within the software to use different scripts, for example, like Arabic script or Cyrillic. That's the next goal. We haven't got there yet.
Wonderful.
We haven't got there yet.
I think David Pawson will be pretty chuffed. I think that he's inspired something that's, it's not unlocking the Bible, but in many ways it is, and making it accessible.
Yes, and I mean, David influenced me not just from a distance, Tim. I met him. Obviously, you knew him quite well. I didn't know him well.
Yeah.
But I remember writing to him once, many years ago, in the days when people wrote letters. And I said, "Dear David, can I come and see you?" And he didn't know me at the time, but he invited me to his home. And I went back on another occasion, and he very much inspired me to continue in that tradition of presenting the whole Word of God. But I'm just aiming at an audience for whom some of the sort of intellectual capabilities required by his teaching, and the academic background aren't always there, because they haven't had the opportunity. Sure. So I'm very, very focused on world mission. I'm very aware that the action and the energy for very much of the advance of the kingdom is in different parts of the two-thirds world or the developing world, in Africa and Latin America, China, overwhelmingly, which is such an incredibly important story. I'd love to get these resources in Chinese. That's my number one goal for an international language, is Chinese, actually.
Okay.
But there we are. So
wonderful introduction to wordonline.org.
That's right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about other things. We're going to give an overview, and hopefully on a future occasion, put you on the spot. Can we, bring you back to talk about other ministry projects? But Jubilee Plus, tell us a little bit about that. I know that you're not now involved, but you did initiate this important work.
So I mean, I've been involved in various different things over the years. Faith and innovation tends to mean you move on and do different things. You don't just stay in the same ministry. I think I'm more inclined towards developing things than maintaining them. And Jubilee Plus was an initiative that arose out of my work in the New Frontiers church movement as a pastor. They asked me in the UK nationally to help them develop a kind of social engagement initiative to help churches with social engagement. This was just after the financial crash and some of the issues that were becoming quite significant socially in terms of poverty in the UK. So I developed a charity, jubilee-plus.org, and I led it for 10 years. I co-wrote 3 books. the myth of the undeserving poor, a church for the poor, and a call to act, which describes some of the things that we were developing and some of the things for churches to think about. And then a couple of years ago, I handed that over to one of my colleagues, and I've moved on to other things, but they're doing really, really well.
Now, in those kind of social action, projects, at the ground level, is it just, as it were, giving a Christian testimony and action, or was there some aspect of being able to get the message in beyond, the demonstration of love and care?
So this is a key issue for the church in the UK, isn't it? Because if it becomes just a charity, then it runs out of steam spiritually. Yeah. So what we helped to encourage churches to do is to bring gospel testimony, offers of prayer, connection to the church, alongside practical help in all sorts of different ways. Yeah. And that would be the goal that I think we should aspire to. Yeah. But some people have found that very difficult. It is
equally the other side of the equation is those that aren't. It's all cerebral and within the church walls.
So I think the kind of mandate that I encourage people to look at was the mandate that Peter gave to Paul, Galatians 2, encouraging Paul and Barnabas to remember the poor. And I think that was a mandate that in the Gentile churches that they were developing, they should have the same focus on need in the community that the Jewish churches that Peter and his team were developing in Judea naturally did because of their Jewish background in the Old Testament. And in the Gentile culture that Paul was working in, charity didn't really exist much, state support didn't exist much, poverty levels very, very high in most of those areas, and Peter wanted that authenticity of outreach to people who are marginalised and poor to be central to the Pauline churches. And so I think that's a biblical apostolic mandate.
It's an ongoing need. The credit crunch is still with us, as it were, and the ramifications, the cost of living crisis and all the other stuff.
We have lots of things developing.
It's pretty serious, but as it were, there is a church that's still alive that can provide a kind of safety net if the state doesn't quite come up with the goods. Yeah. Which is there's so much uncertainty, isn't there? Yes, I mean, since you started that project, you think of COVID and the war that we're now in.
Yeah, well, we had a prophetic word given to us when we started, which was in the time after the financial crash, when things were looking bad, to say that we should consider this era as like Joseph's 7 years of plenty and 7 years of hardship. And the prophet said to us, we're still in the 7 years of plenty. Things are going to get worse. Yeah. That was before COVID, before the Ukraine war, before the fuel costs went up, before the cost of living crisis. We had that word, things will get more difficult. And that is what we're seeing.
We're living through it, and we're all seeking to be faithful witnesses in these times. Yeah. So you've mentioned the war in Ukraine. Now, you have been working over there before it all kicked off. And so I think it'd be interesting because it's interesting to me because I'm very interested in Ukraine and helping folk over there. So what have you been doing over there?
Well, what happened, Tim, was this was another prophetic door opening up, was that a member of my church...
How long ago?
This was in the late 90s, ended up in eastern Ukraine. She came back and told me the story, and I had a prophetic vision in a conference, which has hardly ever happened in my life. And in this prophetic vision, I saw like a Christmas feast in front of me. I was at the head of the table, my family was around, and everybody was happy. And in the far distance were some women calling out to me, elderly women who look like Eastern Europeans to me, share your bread with us. That was a prophetic vision that came to me just after this lady came back from Eastern Ukraine. So I went out in February 1998 to the Donbass, to a church contact there which we'd made.
Which is the far east of Ukraine.
The far east of Ukraine. It's now...
Which no one had heard of a couple of years ago.
No one had heard
now
of.
Everyone knows.
Well, when we started working, nobody knew where we were working for years and years. And we built up contacts. We started this charity, Bread Trust. And we worked in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine. And we helped a network of churches with poverty and church growth and church planting and things like that for a number of years. Then came the first war in 2014. Many people were displaced. Some of the pastors were persecuted. Very, very difficult situation. So we helped them replant their churches across the country, and we supported them in that process. And now we've got like the second development with Putin's invasion.
And communication is very difficult.
Communication is difficult. So our charity is now working at a very high level to try and support a church network around the country, some of whom are in the separatist zone. They're working largely underground. Some of whom are in central Ukraine, some of whom are in western Ukraine, and some groups of churches, of church members have created little fellowships in other countries like Poland, for example. So we're supporting them with housing projects, humanitarian warehouses, vehicles. We've even imported generators for them, electrical generators, to help them because of the energy infrastructure damage that they've experienced from Putin. So we have a good team working there. I chair the charity and try and steer things, but yeah, it's another project.
And you found enough time to talk to little old me, and I'm
very
really,
happy to
really
come and
thrilled.
talk to you.
Really thrilled. I've sort of worked with folks in Western Ukraine, and I was there just after the war broke out, and the floods of refugees coming, just sleeping on church floors, school floors, and it was heartbreaking to see that. And we know it's going to be a need for a long time to come.
It is.
So we're giving an overview, Martin, of faith and innovation. I think we've got pretty well got the message, but what are the consistent themes, whether it's bringing the word to Africa, India, China, whether it's in your local, church fellowship, or the Jubilee Plus ministry?
I think it's always having the ambition to advance the kingdom and not be static, and thinking of creative ways of doing it, and responding to the prophetic opportunities that God gives. And very often that's the key, because prophecy for me is 1% delivery, 99% follow-on.
99%
follow-on.
Follow-on, yeah.
So Joseph had a dream, but then he had to organize a nation.
Exactly.
And so I find that when God speaks to me about something or a door opens, then you just have to follow through and work out what are the implications, how are we going to do this, pray for the resources, and all the things I've discussed with you have all seemed impossible at different times. Just lack of resources, lack of money, lack of people, lack of time, all sorts of challenges along the way. So
what about the pitfalls? From all of your experience, you must have seen some trapdoors out there.
Yes. I think the pitfalls, if you're a personality like me, is doing too many things, being too busy and burning out. So I have to really guard against that by, giving time off and commitment to my family, and focus on devotion and prayer, getting plenty of personal support, operating.
Yeah, that's what
teams.
You shared with me. We just had a little flapjack earlier, and you shared with me about the importance of having close fellowship, as it were.
So I think there's several levels, aren't there? I mean, the local church is the key. I'm a great believer in the local church. I'm totally committed to local church life in whatever role I'm in. But I also think it's important to have mentors and perhaps even disciplers or peer group friends who can pray for you. And I have several people who I meet regularly, and I just allow them to speak into my life, share what's going on. I need that help. It's very easy if you are driven by an idea to get very tunnel visioned, and you miss obvious things, and so you have to be careful there.
Yeah.
And there are times when you feel you're in a spiritual battle and you get stuck. I think we all feel that at times, don't we? And so what do you do then? I think the importance of prayer is very, very great. Getting other people to pray for you. Keeping things very, very straightforward and waiting for God's breakthrough moments. And perseverance is important. In ministry there are times when things don't seem to be happening, or things are slowing down, or there's some discouragements, or other people have let you down in different ways, and you just have to guard against becoming cynical or discouraged or passive by constantly focusing on the goal, God's kingdom, His glory, the advancement of the kingdom of God.
And dare I ask, what's next? Or is it just, developing and expanding on what's
there's one thing on the horizon, Tim, which is to do with Word Online. So there's a whole other development. We spoke about the smartphone use. Yeah. But what we didn't speak about was the fact that many people in the world are digitally excluded because they don't have good connectivity in many parts of the world, very intermittent, and some people live in remote communities with no connectivity at all. And for a lot of people, they can't afford the data that we take for granted because it's cheap here in the UK and in the Western world. And so I'm now working with a charity, with Word Online, who are helping to develop a digital device. It's going to be called The Well, and it's going to be available publicly within a couple of years, that can store all this training material we're talking about, such as Word Online and many other things.
I thought you were going to say you're developing a Bitcoin or something, a Christian Bitcoin.
It can store that. It's like a digital box,
Yeah.
and it has its own Wi-Fi signal,
Yeah.
its own storage capabilities, and also its own learning management system like Moodle built into it. And so therefore, if you're in remote communities, Word Online can get to people who can't even connect to the internet. If they're near one of these devices, which will be given to trainers and church leaders all over the world, then we can reach very important groups of people who are digitally
Wonderful.
excluded. So that is coming up, but that's not something I'm doing personally. I'm just
Very
tied in with
exciting.
some very talented people who are developing it.
Martin Charlesworth, what a blessing to meet you face to face. We have a lot of phone conversations, and I just say thank you to our viewers, and look forward to seeing you next time we go face to face.